Have you ever noticed what happens the exact moment you finally walk away from a toxic person? When you leave, you instantly become the villain in a story you never agreed to be part of. Whispers start circulating, mutual friends begin looking at you differently, and before long, the person who drained you for years is collecting sympathy. And yes, it feels deeply, violently unfair. Every cell in your body wants to correct the record. You want to send the screenshots, make the calls, prove what really happened. But here is what almost nobody understands about the smear campaign. It is not an emotional reaction to losing you, not metaphorically, mechanically. It is a survival reflex, as automatic as a hand pulling back from fire. And the moment you try to defend yourself, you hand them the exact fuel they need to keep the whole thing running. So today we are going to take this thing apart, piece by piece. Why the smear campaign happens, why defending yourself makes it stronger, and the cold, deliberate protocol that makes their entire narrative collapse without you saying a single word. Let's begin. The first thing you have to understand is that a smear campaign is never random. It is a calculated, preemptive strike. Think about the timing. It rarely starts while you are still under their control. It starts the instant they lose access to you. Because when a manipulator can no longer control you, they pivot immediately to controlling how others perceive you. That pivot is the whole game, and it runs on a piece of cognitive science that has been documented for over 50 years. In 1974, two psychologists named Tversky and Kahneman described something called the anchoring effect. They found that human beings latch onto the first piece of information they receive, and every judgment after that is measured against that first anchor. Here is the part that should chill you. The anchor does not need to be true. It does not even need to be logical. Even a random, irrelevant number measurably distorts every decision that follows. Now apply that to your life. Whoever speaks first sets the gravitational field for how everyone interprets everything that comes after. So when the manipulator gets to the group chat before you do, they are setting the anchor before you even have a chance to speak. And when you finally show up with your side of the story, people process it as a desperate adjustment away from a starting point that already feels real to them. The manipulator wins simply by being the first one to speak. Think about that for a second. This is why psychologists have a name for the specific pattern they follow. It is called DARVO, deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It was identified by Dr. Jennifer Freyd, a psychologist who studies betrayal trauma. And the sequence is brutally simple. First, they deny anything happened. Then, they attack your credibility. And then, in the final move, they reverse the roles entirely, so that they become the wounded victim and you become the offender. They paint you as unstable, cruel, and ultimately dangerous. And it is not to destroy you. Think about what that actually means. Their primary goal is to inoculate themselves against any truth you might one day reveal. Because if everyone already believes you are unhinged, then anything you say later just confirms the diagnosis. They are building a false identity, and your reputation is the raw material they are burning to protect it. So the lies feel personal. They feel like an attack aimed at your soul. But that is not what they are. They are load-bearing. They are structural. And once you see the machinery, the emotional sting starts to lose its grip. Now here is where almost everyone makes the fatal mistake. You find out what they are saying, and every human instinct fires at once. You want to clear your name, present the evidence, and show everyone the truth. It feels like a moral requirement, but watch what actually happens when you do it. Behavioral research on DARVO reveals something disturbing about the people watching from the outside. When observers witness this deny-attack-reverse sequence play out, they consistently rate the real victim as less believable, and they rate the actual perpetrator as less abusive and less responsible. Let me say that plainly. The very act of you defending yourself makes third parties trust you less, because the more you push against the frame, the more you look like the aggressive, unstable person the manipulator already described. By fighting back, you end up performing their narrative for them. Defending yourself is actually a surrender of power, and there is a second trap layered underneath the first. Smear campaigns are almost never 100% fabricated. That is the genius of them. They are built from partial truths, strategically distorted, A real thing you said, stripped of context. A real moment of anger, presented without the years of provocation that caused it. So when you try to correct it, you cannot cleanly deny it, because a fragment of it is technically real. You end up explaining, qualifying, adding context. And to everyone watching, explaining looks exactly like guilt. Now think about who you are explaining yourself to. They are called flying monkeys. The term comes from the Wizard of Oz. They are the third parties the manipulator recruits to do the work. Once direct access to you is gone, and the research breaks them into three types. There are the unknowing, who genuinely believe the lies and think they are helping. There are the enablers, who orbit the manipulator out of fear or out of hunger for proximity to power. And there are the scandalmongers, who simply love the drama and want the damage to continue. Here is what you have to internalize. None of these people are neutral juries waiting to weigh your evidence. They have already been anchored, so every message you send, every phone call you make to plead your case, does two things. It exhausts you, and it feeds the manipulator a steady supply of attention and chaos, which is the only thing they were ever after. Meanwhile, the manipulator is not even in the room. They are watching from a distance, feeding off the frantic energy of your defense. Your panic becomes their evidence. The very thing you do to prove your sanity becomes the proof they use to question it. So, if defending yourself only strengthens the trap, what is the alternative? This is where we leave modern psychology and walk back nearly 2,000 years. There was a philosopher named Epictetus. He was born a slave in the Roman Empire. He owned nothing, controlled nothing external, and yet he built the most durable framework for inner freedom ever written. And in his manual, the Enchiridion, chapter 33, he addresses this exact situation with unnerving precision. He wrote that if anyone tells you a certain person is speaking badly of you, do not defend yourself against what was said. Instead, simply answer, "He was plainly ignorant of my other faults," or "He would not have mentioned only these." Sit with the sheer power of that response. He refuses to argue, deny the claims, or summon witnesses to demand a retraction. He absorbs the accusation completely, and in doing so, he removes every surface for the attacker to push against. This is radical, unperformed stillness. This means genuine internal indifference to a narrative you have decided is beneath your participation, not a performance or a stubborn silence. And underneath the philosophy, there is a hard behavioral mechanism that explains exactly why it works. Modern practitioners call it the gray rock method. The idea is to become as unremarkable, as flat, as uninteresting as a gray rock. You give the manipulator no reaction, no emotion, no drama to harvest. This approach is rooted in the behavioral principle of extinction. A behavior that stops being rewarded eventually dies out. The manipulator's entire strategy is built to extract a reaction from you. The outrage, the tears, the frantic 3 a.m. paragraph. That reaction is the reward. So when you refuse to supply it, their tactic hits a vacuum. The narrative they launched needs friction to travel. It needs you to push back so it has something to push against. A story that generates no reaction has nowhere to go. It stalls. And here's the quiet, beautiful part. The people who genuinely know your character never needed the explanation in the first place. And the people demanding an explanation had already chosen their side before they asked. Stillness only costs you the people who were never truly yours to begin with. Stillness is actually the most disciplined weapon in the entire arsenal. But I have to give you one warning, because if you skip it, you will misread what happens next, and you will cave. When you first go still, the manipulator does not quietly accept defeat. They do the opposite. Behavioral science calls this the Extinction Burst. When a behavior that used to get rewarded suddenly gets nothing, the immediate response is escalation. They push harder, spreading louder lies and wilder accusations. They may recruit new flying monkeys, invent new stories, provoke you through other people, and this is the exact moment most people break. They think, the stillness is making it worse, I have to say something now. But understand what is actually happening. This escalation is actually the desperate, flailing evidence that your silence is working. They are throwing everything at the machine because the machine has stopped producing. And here is the critical rule. If you cave during the burst, if you finally react after weeks of silence, You end up teaching them that reactions are simply harder to extract, but still available if they push far enough. That is called intermittent reinforcement, and it is the most addictive reward schedule that exists. It is the same mechanism that keeps people pulling a slot machine handle. Caving once simply guarantees the next campaign will be worse. Consistency is the entire protocol. And when you hold that line, something shifts that the manipulator cannot control. The escalation fails against you, while simultaneously exposing them to everyone watching. Picture it from the outside. On one side there is a person who has calmly, quietly gone on living their life. On the other, there is a person growing louder, angrier, more obsessive, still talking about someone who clearly moved on months ago. Without your reaction to balance the scene, they no longer look like a victim. They look erratic. They look fixated. They start to answer the question you never had to ask. You win by making their opinion of you mechanically irrelevant, rather than trying to prove them wrong. And this is where it stops being theory, because we are watching this exact mechanism play out in public right now. There is a British writer named Cat Farmer. In 2022, at 49 years old, Cat Farmer left her 20-year marriage and has since written publicly about the experience. And here is the detail that matters. There was no affair, no scandal, and no obvious villain for anyone to point to. So watch what her own social circle did. With no villain available, the community defaulted to blaming the person who left. Her. She described the anger, the confusion, the resentment aimed at her, specifically from other women, because leaving violated the story of the selfless wife. Everyone expected her to keep playing. In this case, an entire social circle acted as flying monkeys rather than a single narcissist running a campaign. Because the mechanism does not care whether it is one person or 50. The anchor was set. The one who walked away became the villain by default. But here is the vindication. 4 years later, without her needing to win a single public argument, her own children, and even her ex-husband, came to agree that leaving was the right decision. She defeated the smear by living consistently until reality caught up with the lie. That is the power of the uncorrected record. There is a profound, almost unshakable strength in allowing people to be wrong about you. Your character, held steady over months and years, will dismantle their story more thoroughly than any argument you could ever make. Because a lie needs constant maintenance. The truth just needs time. Now, one honest note, because this channel does not sell fantasies. Epictetus taught this stillness because your reputation was never in your control to begin with, not as a trick to win social wars. Other people's opinions live entirely outside your power. The only thing inside your power is your own judgment and your own conduct. The goal here is to become so anchored in your own reality that their fictional version of you cannot reach the part of you that matters. This is a state you inhabit rather than a strategy you perform. And from that state, the strategic victory just happens to follow. So let's bring this all the way back to where we started. The next time you hear that a toxic person is rewriting history and casting you as the villain, do not panic. Do not draft the long message at midnight. Do not call the mutual friends to plead your case. Recognize the smear campaign for exactly what it is. The desperate, mechanical flailing of someone who has lost their grip on your mind and is now trying to reclaim it through everyone around you. Recognize the anchor they are setting and refuse to chase it. When the extinction burst happens, don't flinch at the noise, and remember that the people worth keeping never needed a defense. Let them have the fictional story. You keep the reality. That is the whole trade, and it has always been in your favor. If this breakdown helped you see the machinery clearly for the first time, subscribe to The Forge. We decode these mechanisms every single week. And leave a comment below. What is the most absurd lie a manipulator ever tried to spread about you? And how did you use stillness to starve it? The next video is already on screen. Go watch it now.